Welcome to Translation Confidential. This is Peter Argondizzo and Patrick Daley, and hey, it's episode 140, Making Translation Invisible and Why the Best Services Feel Effortless. This is going to be a fun episode. Really what we're going to focus on is if you think of translation services today, right, they're those that are doing it well, it's far more in the background. It's complementary to workflows. It happens without knowing it's happening. So when it's done right, it's seamless. It just works. We're going to go over that this week. But first, I think we have some news stories. Patrick, what do you got?
The first one I found this week that's super interesting was from CNBC, and it's talking about how DeepL, for those in the industry, hopefully you know what DeepL is, but they're a translation startup founded in 2017 out of Germany. And this story was highlighting how they launched an AI agent, and it's saying that they're hoping to challenge the big players in the AI industry, like OpenAI. When I read the article, I was honestly confused because their big statement from their spokesperson was they released an AI agent and that the DeepL agent is designed to complete, and in quotes, repetitive, time-intensive tasks across a wide variety of functions. And that's where the quote ends. And to me, I thought, okay, that really told me next to nothing about how you're actually deploying this AI agent and what it does. But to me, like when I read the whole article, basically in my mind, the title is "We're doing AI," and that's about where the article ended for me. So I wasn't quite sure what substance or details were released on that, but from what I could find, it basically just sounds like we're doing AI. End of article.
Yeah, I think there's a rush to that, right, Patrick? Is that you kind of have to like put your stake in the ground and say, yes, we're keeping up, we're doing this. It'll be interesting to see what that functionality is, and it'll be interesting to hear from DeepL when that's rolled out. So yeah, stay tuned. But I think we're going to see more of that, especially from more of the translation as a feature providers, right? So they're obviously strict translation that integrates with many other technologies, but I'm thinking of all the other TAFs. We talk about those programs all the time, and I think to see the challenge of like, oh, we never thought of putting a human in the loop, or oh, we never thought of how do we retrain this engine that's spitting out all this translation. I think we're going to see some changes in that world because I think now that things are leveling out, the consumers are a little more dialed in on like, well, what does that mean? Oh, okay. So I just hit the magic button and then it's translated and that's it. I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen broader articles, not just about the language services space, but just in general of like people are starting to catch on that like there's a lot of fluff in the AI space coming out right now, and like trying to nicely like burst that bubble of like, okay, what are you actually doing? Like, give me specifics on it, not just like we're deploying AI agents to get rid of mundane and repetitive tasks. It's like, okay, which tasks? Like, that's a simple question that can get you maybe a little bit closer to the answer you're looking for.
Absolutely. So stay tuned on that. Obviously, Patrick and I will keep you in the loop. Interesting news out of Slater this morning, hot off the presses, that the Middlebury College will close its graduate programs at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. That should happen by June of 2027. And it's interesting because pretty much like all of the big names in the industry came out of that program, and specifically the translation, interpretation, and localization programs. So that is definitely, I think, a blow to our industry. I'm assuming maybe some other industries or some other universities might step up. There's a lot of other translation programs in the country, but that was definitely the one, right, Patrick? And show prep, we were talking, if you Googled, translation education or language, language education specific to the translation industry, you'd always find Middlebury. That was the one you would find.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it. I did not know that before we started chatting pre-show, so this is obviously late breaking news. But like, I know that's especially people recruiting for language industry professionals coming out of school. Like, I know it's the Middlebury program at Monterey. That's the hotbed where that's kind of their first stop when they go recruiting for talent. So yeah, like you said, it'd be interesting to see kind of where the next generation of young people who want to get into the translation or language industry, kind of where that new hotbed will be.
Yeah, and I definitely hope, there's so much press. We talked about the Microsoft piece that came out that was misinterpreted by most just regular media and saying, oh, translation's dead. I hope that there's a counter, I hope there's a counter to that narrative, a counter to that message, because we need new young talent in our industry. We need folks to get into it because the technology isn't the end all be all, right? The be all end all. There's more to it. There's, like we've been stressing here, is that it's that dance between human process and human intuition with technology that makes these solutions very effective. I think, popular media, and of course, just human nature wants to be like, oh yeah, I just hit that button and I'm done. Well, we all know that that's not really how effective translation gets done. So, well, let's jump in, Patrick. Let's talk about this. So, let me get this started by saying, what does it mean for translation to be invisible? I talked a little bit about that in the opener, but what does that mean to you, that translation's invisible?
Yeah, before the show, I was kind of thinking when we were kicking around this topic, it's kind of like I thought of two examples or metaphors. It's like IT, whereas it's when it's working well, you don't even notice that it's happening, but people are still obviously doing work to make sure that technology is working for everyone throughout every day. But when it doesn't work, you notice very, very quickly. So I think that's like a good analogy in my mind. And then another one is like it's like a good project manager. Um, and yes, I am a project manager, so kind of tooting my own horn here a little bit. But again, it's kind of when things are going well, you don't even notice necessarily what a PM is doing because they're kind of juggling things behind the scenes. But on the front lines, things look very well put together and kind of effortless. So, but again, if you have a bad PM that really rises to the top very, very quickly, like you really notice a gap if there is no PM or a PM is underperforming versus like a high performing PM. It kind of rises to the top very fast.
Your analogy is interesting, Patrick, because like especially in IT services, right? Oftentimes people will try to equate the value to like the number of tickets they have, like tickets being problems. But of course, when IT is functioning well, there's very few tickets. But that doesn't come without a cost. In other words, that's where it's all the investment and the processes and procedures. So in the IT world, obviously that means that all the machines are up to date, that people understand not to click on things they shouldn't click on for phishing attacks, that the server or servers has the right amount of resources, that cloud storage is well balanced and there's proper resources allocated so users can find and use what they want in the cloud when they need it immediately without having to go find it, download it. They should be able to just work on it intuitively right from their desktop, virtual or otherwise. In the translation world, I think of it is that, again, that translation is an afterthought. So I love our connector products because the way that we have that set is that people author, they do their thing. They just know that, at some point today, tomorrow, whatever the schedule is, this story, this content that I'm working on is going to be picked up. It's going to be translated in the ways that I've determined and approved, and it'll just come back. And I also don't have to worry about an invoice because it's going to come at the end of the month, right? So it's across from business practices to the execution, they're not thinking about it. So that's what I was thinking about invisibility.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I think we don't want to conflate being invisible with undervalued. I think, like you mentioned, it's really about reducing the friction so much that clients don't have to think about it. And if we've done that, then we've really done our job to make translation invisible, but also really valuable to that client.
Absolutely. Next point's the role of technology and smart workflows and simplifying the process. So how does technology in these workflows, so what's the secret sauce? How does this all happen? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think it's important to chat through the difference between a smart workflow and a rigid workflow. I think like a service provider kind of beating the drum of this is the only way we can do this is probably a red flag. I think working for that degree of customization with clients to make sure it works for them, not works for you as the provider, is super important. And I think involving the client to kind of make that, like we talked about, to reduce that friction where they don't need to micromanage the process, that they trust the provider to kind of take care of everything on their behalf.
Wonderful. And I think sometimes in our want to make things easier, we make them harder. So I think that that's a common pitfall. I know we're hearing from some of our clients that some of the more traditional connectors that are on the market that they're using actually sounds terrible. In other words, what it takes to get something to feed through this connector takes more time and more steps than manually exporting an XML file and sending it by email to the provider and saying, hey, can you translate this? And then re-importing it. And I think that that's always, for those of us that are responsible in crafting these workflows, I think that should be, our mantra is this truly more simple? And I think part of it too is like, right, it's always, you think of the debate between, I like my Apple products, I like my Android products, right? I would get into these debates with friends and family that were definitely Android. I'm on the Apple side of the equation. Be like, yeah, but with my Android, I can plug this, I can plug this into my phone and I can easily import stuff. I don't have to go to iCloud and I can do all these things. And I'm like, yeah, correct. That's actually the beauty of it. Apple makes it simpler, so less things can go wrong. So it worked, and again, that's just an example. It's my viewpoint, but I think it's that same methodology that we have to apply with vigor to any of these workflows that we create. Did we actually really make it simpler? But, there's kind of the flip side, because I think of, a client that we're working with right now on SharePoint Connector, and we've set up a schedule that it's a couple days a week, and they're getting a lot of situations where they would like us to do additional pickups because of rushes. And I think we're kind of missing the point here, right? Because we want it to be on set it and forget it. So I think the true conversation we need to have with the client is, hey, why don't we just pick up more often? I mean, that's really the trick. I mean, we could pick up twice a day if we really want to. We set the schedule. Sure, that could add to more essentially minimum projects or projects, some level of more effort for us to handle smaller chunks of content. But if it means that the client's getting their content when they need it, kind of makes sense, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point too of like, again, going smart versus rigid. Like, yes, like you have a process and you have an ideal time that you want to scrape for that content. But I think you realize that, well, we can do more. It's just you really need that client. And in this case, it sounds like yes. So you can kind of up the frequency there. But I think it's smart to identify those levers. And I think a really important question that's really simple. It's kind of two questions, I guess, is first ask why, and then ask why is this important? And that will get you a lot of answers that you need.
Absolutely. Understanding the mission behind the question is always really, really important. And I think that's a good transition into, well, like, what are some of the pieces that make this up? So what are some of the things that your provider is going to ask you or talk to you about, or components that go into the total solution? Because I think there's multiple, and maybe we start with portals, because I know that that's been a big push for us in the last 12 months. We've essentially created 4 portals, and really all of that is in the realm of creating transparency, right? So we have our customer portal, which allows all of our customers to see in real time status of their projects, request new projects, add colleagues that can request new projects, download files, download invoices, see open orders. Basically, it's their back office. We expose our back office to them, so it seems like theirs. It's very natural, right? But then we have the vendor portal, which is where all our translators go in real time. They can see their purchase orders and say, oh, I just finished these 6 projects. Boom, 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 boom. Submit an invoice. Messages go out to the project managers. They approve. Hey, yep, this work has been done, and now it's clear for payment. Wonderful. The next 2 that I think are really interesting is we created an acquisition portal. We've done 2 acquisitions and we plan to do more. And one of the places where acquisitions fall down is transparency. So again, When we're invisible, we have to make sure when the process is invisible in the background, we still have to provide that layer of transparency where a client can say, client or whoever the target audience is, a vendor, an acquired company, hey, what's going on in the background? What are my expectations? Like, when am I going to get my files? In the acquisition thing, when am I going to get my commission on an earnout? It creates that level of transparency. So the acquisition portal allows clients to see in real time I shouldn't say clients, allows the acquired company in real time to see how we're doing on the projects that used to be their portfolio. And then lastly, partnership, same thing, level of transparency. We sign a partnership agreement with a client and they want to see what sort of work. That's the kind of thing we do with an ad agency, a marketing company, a company that creates content. So anyway, that's really what we've done to create that layer of transparency. So think of this. You need that layer in order for these types of processes to work. If you don't have that, I think everything else falls down.
Yeah, I think a good point of clarification on a portal too is it's not necessarily a place where I know I've seen like I'll call them bad portals from other companies that are just hey, drop your file here, we'll spit out a quote, click approve,
File
don't have to
upload
talk to a
widget.
person ever. Yeah, basically a big dumping ground for files. But I think like you're saying, really serving that helpful information to them and still realizing that there's a time and a place to have people in the process and where they can add the most value to working with those clients. So it's not, I don't think it's necessarily meant for portals to replace kind of the human experience of working with providers, but it's kind of a good first stop where you can kind of preemptively get in front of some of the things that like might be repetitive, like, hey, where's my invoice for this thing? Like that's a great use of a portal, is like, oh, you can just log in and see, here's my laundry list of invoices. Like I don't have to go email a PM who has to email finance, then emails the PM, then emails the client. It really kind of, like we've been talking about, just reduces that friction in the process.
Absolutely. A great point, Patrick. Next on the list is glossaries. So I think this is I think it's one of the most undervalued resources in translation. And I think that with the advent of more AI tools, it should really be one of the most important things that should get done. And I think the reason is because the glossaries could be so beneficial to so many different tools that you might use that use AI as the fulcrum, right? A glossary sets the tone, whether your company uses specific acronyms. If your company name is a common word, in other words, if your company name is Purple, say, oh, I was talking to Purple today, it's going to get translated to the color purple.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like those, that sort of that like in the weeds kind of stuff. It's like, let's put the company name in and make sure that always stays in English.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put all of our specific terminology in so that the AI can lever off of what we expect those terms to be. And just that sort of effort, which, by the way, your translation service provider should be able to help you with. If you have massive amounts of content, there's tools out there that can analyze and figure out what the most commonly used terms are.
Mm-hmm.
And they could start there with a glossary list. At least I always feel like if you start with something and then you look at the list and you're like, oh yeah, but we need this and we need this and we need this.
Mm-hmm.
Just having something on paper is incredibly helpful to get your mind going to add other terms. And remember, it's a living, breathing thing. So, update it once a quarter, once a month, whatever's.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned company names because I recently took on a new client, and they kind of have had two names in their email signature. So in our kickoff, we asked about, they're like, hey, what's going on? Like, why do you have two different names? And they're like, oh, we do a lot of business in the Eastern European region. And in a lot of those languages, if you try to translate our name, it sounds like a curse word or a slur. I can't remember what they said, but they kicked the can on translation. They found like, ooh, we should not say that word in this country. So that's, they kind of evolved their name. It's, their regular company name plus the second name, so that they kind of use that in the Eastern European market. So they're not putting out like a bad translation of their name. So like that's a very real example that's crept up on me recently. But like you mentioned, like glossaries will help you get ahead of stuff like that. And I kind of think of a glossary as like being able to take your notes to the test that you have to take. Like you've already got 30% of the answers down in your notes. So like, why wouldn't you start with that baseline knowledge rather than just going in completely blank?
Absolutely. So important. So I would highly recommend any of you that are launching into any translation work and, wanting some type of integrated environment or, some collaboration between your project types. Because remember, I think what people forget, especially if they've never done translation, and I'm shocked, we run into some very large corporations that have done ad hoc translations or by other employees. So starting from the ground up is great because you can launch into initiatives like this, like, hey, let's create a glossary and then let's make that part of everything, because there can be so many different project types in an organization: captions for videos, voiceover videos, knowledge base articles, the website, technical manuals. And suddenly you start to dig deep and you're like, oh, wow, we have a lot of different things here that we could potentially translate. If you have that glossary as a fulcrum, it also is going to help during client review. And, we've done shows on client review. It's been a minute. I may need to revisit that, Patrick, client review in the age of AI. But that also leads us to just other tools, right? So what are some of the AI tools? Let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the tools that help make the translator invisible? And to kick things off, one of the things that I can think of is, just an internal tool that we're using to help us create our proposals more quickly. But this is pretty awesome. We took the job descriptions we created on 4,000 projects and we built a little model around it, and we prompted, this was cool. We worked with our development team on this. And I said, hey, can you give me a JSON object that gives me the file types, the languages, the workflows we're proposing, and just put it in a little object so I can lever it in a prompt and create a draft one project description. And it's been really amazing. I mean, and hey, sometimes it needs to get modified. But again, having something on paper as kind of like your first draft, getting to that first draft is key. So that's a way that we're using it internally. But let's just open the discussion. What are some other tools that we can use in this process?
Yeah, I think you mentioned one already of like very simple, but kind of having AI make that first pass of all of your content and pulling out the most common terms for your glossary is a big one. But I think on the back end of that one too, it's having a checker to make sure that the glossary was followed during the translation process is another big one of like, okay, we have this glossary, we have, source language, target language. Did we follow it throughout the entire translation? So basically grading to make sure you followed that. I know QA checkers are a big one too, to make sure you're following
Absolutely.
either the translation memory, the glossary, or both. So those seem like a big one, especially on the actual translator side of things that come to mind.
Yeah, those are great. And you can put those in different places in a workflow, right? So sort of those QA tools, using AI to, prompt something up and say, hey, this is, you are the glossary police, you are the grammar police, you can basically set up a prompt and then use AI to really perform some qualitative measure. Like we're thinking of using it internally, like once we get enough data out of the new workflows we're using that we're proposing to clients and providing those, to say, well, this client typically chooses this, right? Just use AI to say, over the last 200 projects, this is what they typically choose. This is to help set automatically like the recommended level of service. It's like when you have lots of data and you need, someone to process it and make a decision, AI is great for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else, Patrick? Like other tools like, I don't know, email creation. I know, I'm sure all of us have used chat to help with sensitive emails, but other redundant tasks you can think of, or approvals, or even outside of translation, is there anything else that you can think of?
Yeah, I worked with someone who they took all of their sent emails and exported them and fed them into a custom GPT and then said, I want you to be basically robo me and give me a first draft response to every email that I get.
Oh, that's
So they
pretty
kind of
cool.
they're like, here's my voice, here's how I've responded to stuff in the past, like pretend to be me and give me my first draft. Yeah, I think gave a couple of prompts around it. He's like, don't take yourself too seriously, like be a little sassy and edgy in there. But he was like, if I didn't want to reply to an email, the first thing I'd do is dump it in and be like, okay, now I have my first draft. And that may not seem like a lot, but for those of us who get dozens to hundreds of emails a day that need to be replied to, that could be a huge source of time saving.
Absolutely. That's a really, really cool example. All right, so let's dive in a little bit deeper, I guess, and the marriage between people and tech. And this will be kind of our closing topic on this. I've got a few points to discuss, but we talked a little bit earlier about how invisible doesn't equal fully automated. And the bigger point there is that I've been trying to stress to all my colleagues. I have to be honest. I've tried to limit my LinkedIn exposure lately because I feel like in our industry, especially, it's I don't know. It's just so negative, right? It's so negative and so woe is me, and the translation just done. And I know this is just my opinion. I think it's your opinion. I don't want to speak for you, Patrick, but I mean, humans are still key to all of this.
I mean, who's building all of the AI engines and training the engines and developing them? Like that didn't just happen.
Exactly. It's like they didn't just flip a switch and go, "You're smart. Go do this."
Yeah, AI is turned on now.
Yeah. I mean, it happened on the backs of all the work of the wonderful translators, years and years and years of work. You think of, we've talked about trained engines, which is essentially the marriage between machine translation and AI. If you stick AI in the loop, getting a neural machine translation with some sort of QA on the back end with a human in the loop, right? So it's that dance between all these resources. And I think that's where we need to focus. And for me, I see this very much, again, I've said this before, and I don't think I'm overstating this. This is similar to the disruption that was caused by translation management systems. And when that happened, along with the advent of the EU, and yes, that tells you how old I am. I'm old. The translation industry exploded. And I think that's where we are. I think enterprises have gotten that for years, right? That they're just, I have this huge chunk of translation that I need to do, and I need to do it more often. How can I minimize the cost? So they've been working on the fringes of all these things: machine translation, translation management. Like, these workflows have been around for a long time. So we have so much more computing power now, right? That your average person on a desktop can get things done that you would have needed a server bank to do in the past, right? So to me, this is inspiration for all of us to go forward and say, how do we help all of these companies do this more effectively going forward? And where that used to be only an enterprise level task, I think now even the smallest of companies can leverage some of these tools, and translation service providers like our company and others, many others obviously, can help get this done. But you have to do a good job of discovery and exploration. What are your budgets? And by the way, clients, I can't speak for all, but for most conscientious translation service providers, when they ask you, what's your budget, they're not trying to get the budget and then just make whatever pricing they give you 10% below that. What they're trying to figure out is, how complex of a solution can we provide? And there's just mitigating factors. If we can't do this, well, it's this. But maybe we're picking up some risk. So for me, Patrick, that's the big point for me, is that, again, I like the point you made that invisible doesn't mean that the humans aren't there, or that we're cheapening what the human effort is. I would say it's the contrary.
Yeah, and I think we'll see, like you said, I think the industry is in a bit of an inflection point of AI can do everything versus AI can do nothing. And I think the answer, obviously, as we've said before, is somewhere in the middle. But I think you can either, like you can mention with the advent of translation memory, is you can either run from it or run with it. And I think those that run with it will come through in the end. And if they use that technology to their benefit and to their clients' benefit, they'll rise to the top. I mean, a super simple example is, I know we talked about machine translation quite a bit, but that might be able to get you 80% there, and that linguist will take you that extra 20% to get you to the end of the project. But the client doesn't the client doesn't care about that step necessarily. And if they don't care about it, that's a good thing, because they don't have to think about it. They know the process. They know, okay, MT is going to get us 80, the human's going to get us over the finish line. But if you establish that workflow with them up front, like, they just don't have to think about it. It just gets done.
Absolutely, Patrick. I think, those of us that are out here have to understand that we've stopped selling translation and localization and interpretation a long time ago. That's not what we're selling. You said the client doesn't necessarily care about that last 20%. You're absolutely right. Because what does the client care about? I have a trade show to go to, and I need to have my website and all the specific landing pages translated before I go, because this is a centerpiece of my marketing strategy when I'm in the booth. That's what they want. I need to get engagement with the people that come to my booth, and I know they're going to be multilingual. Great. I have a technical manual that's tied to a release, software release. If I don't get that technical manual done, which these days is usually online help or a PDF or something, if I don't get that done, I don't get to release. I don't meet my quarterly numbers. So what we're selling is the ability for a client to meet their quarterly numbers. We are not selling the translate. They could care less about the translation, right? Yes, they want it to be, good quality. They want it to be reasonable in cost. But what they're buying is the ability to meet their quarterly numbers. It's that result at the end of it. And I think that's where all of this should be, is that, really the technology has to be married to good linguists. And, there's that inverse relationship. I think this was a good point you made in our show notes, Patrick, is that, there's a partnership aspect, and it's sort of the balance, right? If you think of the balance, you have good technology, but not great translators. Well, that's not right. You have really, really good translators without good technology. Well, you're going to be slow, right? So those pieces are incredibly important. What I want to end with is that, again, this idea that effortless for the client requires an amazing amount of effort and investment behind the scenes. There's just a lot. So that's kind of where I mean, what do you think, Patrick? I think that's what we always go to most important point, and I already know what mine's going to be, but what are your closing thoughts before we get to that?
Yeah, but I think, like, the effortless point that you bring up and how it requires a lot of effort behind the scenes, we can take your Apple example again, and it's taken how many, probably millions of people hours to make those solutions that effortless to you, the user. Apple just didn't flip a switch and say, cool, we can do all this stuff now. It took years and years and years of development and testing and putting it through the ringer. I mean, you can see how many employees work at Apple. You can look it up online. I mean, there's thousands of people who have poured their sweat and tears into those solutions that, to you as the user, as we've said before, like, just work. But they don't just happen, and that's why iPhones cost how much they cost, is for those years and years and years of development and innovation on Apple's side.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great point, Patrick, and probably a good place to close. And for biggest takeaways, I'll go first. My biggest takeaway is just that ease of use looks very elegant and maybe simple, or that simplicity, and it should never be misinterpreted as, oh, that solution isn't very good. It's not complex enough. And I think what we have to shoot for is the reverse. It has to be simple. It has to work, because the clients are going to get used to wanting their translation when they want it, how they want it. And it has to be simple on the front end, but it's like, those goofy accessories posters, right? Where the iceberg is under the water and all you see is this little tippy top but then underneath the water is this massive iceberg. And I think that's really what it has to be, is that to the client, it looks simple and effortless, but behind the scenes, it's a very robust solution.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I can't get the Apple analogy out of my head now, but I'm thinking back to the early days of iPhones and cell phones in general. Is when you upgraded your phone, you used to have to go to the store, give them your SIM card. They would do a bunch of copying and black magic behind the scenes, dump it into your new phone, but you'd still probably lose half the stuff on your phone transfer. Whereas now, if you get I'm going to use an iPhone because I've had a bunch of them, but now when you get a new one, your new phone pops up with what looks like a QR code. You scan it, and your old phone ports over to your new one in about 5 minutes. And that doesn't just happen. Like, that took a tremendous amount of dev work on their side to be like, cool, we'll just migrate your account over here rather than doing some goofy SIM card switching stuff in the background that doesn't really work anyways.
100%.
But yeah, my big takeaway is, I think, like we've talked about, it is kind of the marriage between art and science. So we've got the science of all this technology at our disposal, but I think that linguists and translators and language professionals will never go out of business. I think the people in the process are still super, super important, and it's how we can leverage that technology to do things that people may not want to do, or things that would take people a ton of time. Like you mentioned, like data analysis and AI is a great starting point, at least, but that used to require, hours of reading through all of the data to figure out what was going on. And now you can say, okay, AI, read that data for me and give me the highlights. And then you can kind of drill down to the important stuff that you actually want to read from that data.
Absolutely. And that's a great place to close. Thank you very much for joining us in this episode of Translation Confidential. Until next time, this is Peter and Patrick signing off.